What happens when a multi-billionaire, a woman who commands Wall Street boardrooms and moves markets with a single phone call, breaks down in a humble Chicago diner? It's not over a market crash or failed merger, but over a simple tarnished silver necklace worn by a waitress earning minimum wage. Eleanor Lawson was a creature of habit and precision. At 82, she ran Lawson Global with the same iron will she'd possessed at 42. Her world was one of sterile boardrooms, sanitized private jets, and hushed conversations with executives who managed fortunes larger than the GDP of small countries. Yet once a month, she broke her own rules. She would dismiss her driver, take a simple black town car, and visit Maple Street Cafe, a quiet, unassuming restaurant in a part of Chicago she rarely frequented anymore. It wasn't the food she came for, though it was decent. It was the ghost of a memory. This was where she and her late husband Jonathan had their first real date. Back then, it was just a struggling diner, and they were two ambitious kids with a dream cooked up in a garage. Now the garage was a global tech campus, and Jonathan was 10 years gone. The cafe was a time capsule, and sitting in her usual corner booth, Eleanor felt the suffocating weight of her empire lift, replaced by the heavier, sharper weight of grief. She traced the rim of her water glass, her mind drifting to Jonathan's laugh, the way he'd steal fries from her plate. "More water, ma'am." Eleanor looked up, pulled from her reverie. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, stood by the table with a pitcher. She had a kind, tired face, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that had started to fray around the edges. Her uniform was clean but worn. Eleanor noted the slight tremor in her hand, the sign of a double shift, the exhaustion that clung to those who worked for survival, not legacy. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, her voice softer than her board members ever heard it. As the waitress leaned forward to pour the water, the lamplight from the fixture above caught something on her chest. A glint of silver. It was a necklace, long and delicate, tucked partially into the collar of her uniform. From the chain hung a small, uniquely shaped charm, a star, a locket fashioned into a five-pointed Polaris. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her manicured hand, adorned with a formidable diamond ring, flew to her own throat, where nothing lay but the crepe-like skin of old age. It couldn't be. It was impossible. There was only one of those in the world. Jonathan had designed it himself, had it custom made by a master silversmith in Italy for their 10th anniversary. The necklace, Eleanor stammered, her voice a raw whisper. The world around her seemed to warp and fade. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of other diners, it all dissolved into a low hum. The waitress straightened up, a look of polite confusion on her face. She touched the star locket instinctively. "Oh, this? I'm sorry. Is it unprofessional? I can tuck it in." "No," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were suddenly clouded with a storm of emotion. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the piece of jewelry. She could see the faint, familiar scratches on its surface, the way the chain had worn thin near the clasp. "Where did you get that?" The question was not a polite inquiry. It was a demand, raw and desperate, stripped of all her usual composure. The waitress, whose name tag read Sarah, looked taken aback, even a little frightened by the sudden intensity of the old woman. It was my mother's," Sarah replied, her hand still protectively covering the locket. "It's been in my family a long time." "Your mother?" Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind. Isabel, her daughter, her beautiful, rebellious, lost daughter. The argument, the slammed door, the years of silence that followed, it all came crashing back. Eleanor pushed herself to her feet, her movements unsteady. The carefully constructed fortress of her composure, built over decades of loss and ruthless business, was crumbling. She reached a trembling hand across the table, not to touch the necklace, but as if pleading with it, with the ghost it represented. "Please," Eleanor whispered, and the sound was so broken it startled them both. "I have to know. What was your mother's name?" Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowed with concern. This elegant, powerful woman was visibly falling apart in front of her. "Are you all right, ma'am? Should I get you some air?" Her name, Eleanor insisted, her voice rising, drawing stares from adjacent tables. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped her eye and traced a path through the fine lines on her cheek. Then another, and another. The billionaire, the titan of industry, Eleanor Lawson, stood in the middle of a humble Chicago cafe and began to sob, a heart-wrenching, silent breakdown that shook her entire frame. All for a waitress's necklace. Sarah, stunned and overwhelmed, could only whisper the answer. Her name was Isabel. Isabel Mitchell. Isabel. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a cry of pure, unadulterated anguish. It was her. After 30 years of searching, of hiring private investigators who came up with nothing, of nights spent staring at an empty nursery, here was the answer. In a cafe, around the neck of a tired waitress, her granddaughter. The silver star had guided them home at last, just as Jonathan always said it would. But the reunion Eleanor had dreamed of for 3 decades was about to become far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. The ride to Eleanor's estate was a blur of silence and disbelief. Sarah, who had called her friend to cover the rest of her shift, sat awkwardly in the plush leather seat of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle more luxurious than any apartment she had ever lived in. Beside her, Eleanor Lawson was a study in contained grief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now, staring out at the Chicago skyline as if seeing it for the first time. They pulled through imposing wrought iron gates and up a long, winding driveway to a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. A uniformed butler, a man named Charles who had served the Lawson family for 40 years, opened the door. His face was a mask of professional concern at the sight of his employer's disheveled state and her unexpected guest. "Mrs. Lawson, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "Everything has changed, Charles," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with meaning. "Please bring tea to the library for 2. The library was a room out of a dream, floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a rolling ladder, and the scent of old paper and leather. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, a portrait of a handsome, smiling man hanging above it. It was Jonathan. Eleanor sank into a deep armchair near the hearth. "Please sit," she gestured to Sarah, who chose a stiff-backed chair opposite her, perching on the edge as if ready to flee. "Ma'am, Mrs. Lawson, I don't understand what's happening," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath. "That necklace," she started, her gaze drifting back to the silver star. "My husband Jonathan, the man in the portrait, he had it made for me. There is only one in the world. It is a locket. Is there anything inside?" Sarah's hand went to the locket instinctively. "My mother told me never to open it. She said it would only bring questions I wasn't ready for." She hesitated, then her fingers found the tiny, almost invisible clasp. With a faint click, the star opened. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of a young, laughing couple, a much younger Eleanor and Jonathan. On the other side, an inscription was engraved in elegant script. The next few days were a surreal limbo. Sarah and her son Tyler moved into a guest suite at the Lawson mansion that was larger and more opulent than any home they had ever known. 6-year-old Tyler was in heaven, convinced he had moved into a castle. He ran through the manicured gardens, marveled at the indoor swimming pool, and befriended the stern-faced butler Charles, who found himself cracking a smile for the first time in years. For Sarah, however, the mansion felt like a gilded cage. She was a guest, but also a specimen under a microscope. The household staff treated her with a mixture of curiosity and formal distance, clearly taking their cues from Marcus and Victoria, who made their disdain known at every opportunity. Eleanor, on the other hand, tried her best to bridge the 30-year gap. She showered Tyler with affection and gifts he was too young to understand the value of. She spent hours with Sarah, showing her old photo albums, sharing stories of Isabel's childhood, trying to piece together the life her daughter had lived. For the first time in a decade, a genuine light returned to Eleanor's eyes. She was rediscovering a part of herself she thought was dead and buried. "Your mother loved to paint," Eleanor said one afternoon, her gloved finger tracing over a photograph of a teenage Isabel with paint smudged on her cheek. "She could find beauty anywhere, in a wilting flower, a crack in the pavement." Her voice trailed off, filled with regret. "I tried to push her towards a more practical path, business, law. I didn't understand that her art was her soul. I smothered the very thing that made her special." Sarah listened, absorbing these new facets of her mother. She saw the pain and guilt that haunted Eleanor, and her heart went out to the old woman. A fragile bond began to form between them, woven from shared grief and tentative hope. But Marcus and Victoria were not idle. They viewed this budding relationship as a catastrophic threat to their dominion, their inheritance, their status, their power. It was all at risk. "She's manipulating her. You see it, don't you?" Victoria hissed at Marcus one evening in their own wing of the mansion. "Playing the part of the meek, grateful orphan. And your mother, addled by grief and age, is falling for it hook, line, and sinker." "The DNA results will take another week," Marcus said, pacing his study. "We can't just wait. We need to discredit her. We need leverage. Something to prove she's not the saint she appears to be." Victoria's eyes gleamed with cruel intelligence. "Everyone has secrets, darling. Especially people who have had to struggle. They get desperate. They make mistakes." She picked up her phone. "I know a man, a private investigator, Robert Sterling. He's discreet, and he's very, very good at finding dirt. Let's see what skeletons this little waitress has in her closet." Robert Sterling was a man who operated in the city's shadows. Within 2 days, he began digging into Sarah Mitchell's life. It was a disappointingly clean record. She worked hard, paid her bills, sometimes late, and had no criminal history. She was, by all accounts, a decent person. But Sterling was paid to find something, and if he couldn't find it, he was adept at creating it. He discovered that 2 years prior, Sarah had been in a minor car accident. The other driver, a man named Marcus Thorne, had been aggressive and claimed she was at fault. The insurance handled it, but not before Thorne had made a scene. Sterling saw an opening. He contacted Marcus Thorne, a man with a gambling problem and a perpetually empty wallet. For a few thousand in cash, Thorne was more than happy to change his story. He would now claim that Sarah had tried to bribe him at the scene, offering him cash to not call the police because she'd been drinking. It was a lie, but it was a believable one. Victoria was delighted. It wasn't a felony, but it was enough. It painted a picture of a deceitful, manipulative person. It was a seed of doubt they could plant in Eleanor's mind at the perfect moment. Meanwhile, Sarah remained oblivious to the plot against her. Her biggest struggle was with her own identity. One day she was a waitress, the next, the potential heiress to a billion-dollar fortune. The whiplash was severe. One afternoon, Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer, a kind, elderly man with gentle eyes, requested a meeting with her. "Mrs. Lawson has instructed me to begin the process of recognizing you as her legal heir, pending the DNA results," he explained calmly. "This involves setting up trusts, understanding tax implications. It's a significant undertaking." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. Trusts, taxes. "Mr. Abernathy, I still don't know how to use the coffee machine in the kitchen. It all feels wrong, like I'm an imposter." "You are not an imposter, my dear," he said gently. "You are family. But be warned, with a family like the Lawsons, that title comes with as much conflict as it does comfort. Marcus and Victoria will not accept you easily." His words were prophetic. Later that day, Sarah was in the garden watching Tyler play when Victoria approached her, a false sweet smile plastered on her face. "Enjoying the grounds?" Victoria asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "You and your son have certainly made yourselves at home. Tyler loves it here, Sarah replied politely, refusing to be baited. I'm sure he does, Victoria purred. Children love shiny things. And you, Sarah, seem to have found the shiniest toy of all. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A word of advice, take a settlement. Eleanor will give you a few million to disappear. It would be enough to set you and your boy up for life. Take the money and run. Because if you stay, if you try to take what belongs to my husband, I will make your life a living hell. I will dig up every mistake you've ever made and broadcast it to the world. You won't just lose the inheritance, you'll lose your dignity, too. The threat was undisguised, a declaration of war. Sarah stared at her, horrified but resolute. This isn't about the money for me. It's about my grandmother. Victoria laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Oh, you poor, naive girl. You have no idea what you're up against. She turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the beautiful, sunlit garden, a cold dread seeping into her heart. The wait for the DNA results was now a ticking time bomb. The storm was gathering, and Sarah was standing directly in its path. The day the DNA results were due to arrive, the atmosphere in the Lawson mansion was electric with tension. It felt less like a family home and more like the headquarters of two opposing armies waiting for a critical dispatch from the front lines. Eleanor had requested everyone gather in the library, the same room where the drama had begun. She sat in her large armchair by the fireplace. Sarah and a quiet, nervous Tyler on a sofa nearby. Marcus and Victoria took seats on the opposite side of the room, their posture rigid, their faces grim. Mr. Abernathy arrived precisely at 3 p.m. He was a man accustomed to high-stakes situations, but even he seemed to feel the oppressive weight in the room. He carried a single-sealed manila envelope. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the stormy silence. "I have the results from the lab." All eyes locked on the envelope. It contained more than just a scientific finding, it held the future of the Lawson dynasty. Julian leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Victoria's painted smile was tight, her eyes like chips of ice. Sarah held Tyler's small hand, her own palm sweating. Mr. Abernathy carefully broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He scanned it, his expression unreadable. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he looked up, his gaze settling on Eleanor. The analysis compared the DNA sample provided by Ms. Sarah Mitchell with a sample from yourself, Eleanor, he announced formally. The results are conclusive. He paused for dramatic effect. The probability of grandmaternity is 99.999%. Sarah Mitchell is without any scientific doubt the daughter of the late Isabel Lawson Mitchell and your granddaughter. A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor closed her eyes, and a single tear of pure relief rolled down her cheek. She reached a hand out to Sarah, her smile radiant. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew it in my soul." Sarah felt a wave of vindication wash over her. She squeezed Tyler's hand and smiled back at her grandmother, a genuine, happy smile. It was real. It was all real. Marcus slumped back in his chair as if he'd been punched, a look of pure fury on his face. This was his worst-case scenario. But Victoria was not defeated. She was prepared. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "Well," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the emotional moment like a shard of glass. "That's settled, then." She stood up, a folder in her hand that Sarah hadn't noticed before. "While we were all waiting for this oh-so-touching reunion to be confirmed, Marcus and I thought it prudent to do our own due diligence, to understand exactly who we are welcoming into this family." Eleanor's smile faded. "Victoria, what is the meaning of this? This is a moment for celebration." "Is it?" Victoria replied, her voice saccharine. "Or is it a moment to face the truth? You see, Eleanor, you may have found your blood, but you have no idea who this woman really is." She opened the folder. "We hired a private investigator, Robert Sterling, very thorough. She pulled out a document and began to read. Let's see. Sarah Mitchell, a string of low-paying jobs, constantly behind on rent. But this is the interesting part. 2 years ago, on May 14th, a traffic accident on a Chicago street. The other driver, a Mr. Marcus Thorne. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered the incident, the belligerent man who had yelled at her. According to Mr. Thorne's sworn affidavit, Victoria continued, her eyes gleaming with triumph, Ms. Mitchell was erratic and smelled of alcohol. When he threatened to call the police, she offered him $500 in cash to forget the whole thing, an attempt to bribe a man to cover up a DUI. How resourceful. The accusation was a bombshell. It was a complete and utter lie, but it was presented with such authority, such documentation, that it sounded damning. That's not true. Sarah cried out, jumping to her feet. He's lying. The man was a maniac. He screamed at me, but I was not drinking. I never offered him money. Of course you'd say that, Marcus chimed in, rising to stand with his wife. You're a born liar. Your whole life has been a struggle, scraping for money. The opportunity arises, you try to lie and cheat your way out of trouble. It's in your character. Eleanor looked from Marcus and Victoria's smug faces to Sarah's panicked one. A flicker of doubt, a tiny, poisonous seed, was planted. She had been so blinded by hope, so desperate to believe in this fairy tale. Had she been naive? She thought of her own world, a world of contracts, betrayals, and ruthless ambition. People lied for far less than $1 billion inheritance. Sarah, Eleanor asked, her voice faltering, is there any truth to this? The question itself was a betrayal, and it shattered Sarah's heart. Tears sprang into her eyes, tears of hurt and fury. After everything, after the DNA test, after opening her life to this family, to have her grandmother, the one person she was beginning to trust, look at her with suspicion. It was too much. You believe them, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She looked at Eleanor's conflicted face and saw that the seed of doubt was already taking root. The joy of the moment was gone, poisoned by a calculated lie. Victoria had won this round. She had successfully turned a moment of reunion into one of accusation and mistrust. Sarah shook her head, a profound sense of despair washing over her. I can't do this, she said, her voice barely audible. She took Tyler's hand, pulling him close. I don't want your money. I don't want any of this. She turned and fled the library, leaving behind a stunned silence, a triumphant Victoria, and a heartbroken old woman whose greatest hope had just been corrupted by a venomous lie. But this story was far from over. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And sometimes, the greatest revelations come from the most unexpected places, like a box of old letters that had been waiting 30 years to tell their story. Sarah's retreat back to the guest suite was a flurry of tearful, desperate packing. She threw her and Tyler's meager belongings into their old, worn duffel bags. The luxurious room, which had once felt like a dream, now felt like a prison of judgment and suspicion. Tyler, confused and scared by his mother's tears, just hugged his new teddy bear, a gift from Eleanor, and watched in silence. We're going home, sweetie, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Back to our real home. Her resolve was absolute. She could endure poverty. She could endure hardship, but she would not endure being called a liar and a cheat. She would not subject her son to a family that would use him as a pawn in their cruel games. The brief moment of doubt in Eleanor's eyes had severed the fragile bond between them more effectively than any lie. Downstairs, the library was a war zone of words. How could you? Eleanor raged at Marcus and Victoria. Her own heartbreak was now solidifying into fury. You took a moment of pure joy, and you deliberately, maliciously destroyed it. We revealed the truth, Marcus shot back, his voice rising to match hers. We are trying to protect you. This woman is a grifter. Her character is flawed. Can you imagine the scandal when the tabloids get hold of this? Billionaire's heir in DUI bribery scandal. It would tarnish the Lawson name forever. A name you seem to care about more than your own family, Eleanor retorted. More than your long-lost niece, more than my happiness. My primary duty is to this company, this legacy, Marcus thundered. Something you taught me. You can't let sentimentality cloud your judgment and put everything Jonathan and you built at risk for some waitress. Their argument was interrupted by a soft knock on the library door. It was Charles, the butler. His face was grave. Mrs. Lawson, I apologize for the intrusion, he said. Ms. Mitchell has packed her bags. She is waiting for a taxi by the front gate. Eleanor's heart plummeted. She was leaving. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was about to lose her family all over again, this time because of her own hesitation, her own son's cruelty. She had to stop her. As Eleanor rushed from the room, Sarah was in her suite doing one last sweep. She opened a closet to make sure she hadn't left anything. Tucked away on the top shelf was a battered cardboard box she had brought from her apartment, the one containing her mother's few possessions. She hadn't had the heart to look through it since moving in. Now something compelled her to open it. Inside were old sketchbooks, dried paintbrushes, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed in her mother's elegant script to Mrs. Eleanor Lawson, Lawson Estate, Chicago. They had never been sent. The postmarks were all from 30 years ago. With trembling hands, Sarah untied the ribbon and began to read the first one. Dearest Mother. I hope this letter finds you well. I've tried calling, but no one ever puts me through. I am so sorry for the things I said. I was angry and hurt, but I never stopped loving you. Michael and I are struggling, but we are happy. I wish you could see that. I wish you could meet him. He is kind and good. Please, Mother, just talk to me. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had tried to reconcile. She read another letter, dated a few months later. Mother. Something wonderful has happened. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. I know you must be angry with me, but I hope the news of a grandchild will soften your heart. I want my child to know you and to know Father. Michael is so excited. We want to come home. I've left a dozen messages with Marcus's assistant. Has he not passed them on? Please call me at this number. A cold dread washed over Sarah as she read the line again. I've left a dozen messages with Marcus's assistant. She frantically tore through the other letters. They told a story of increasing desperation. Letters about Michael getting sick with a fast-acting cancer. Letters begging for help, not for herself, but for him. And then the final, heart-wrenching letter. Mother. Michael is gone. He died this morning. I am alone, and I am 7 months pregnant. I have nothing. I called the main house again today, desperate to speak to you. Marcus answered. He told me you wanted nothing to do with me. He said you told him that my choices had consequences and that I was to never contact the family again. He said you had disowned me. My heart is broken, Mother, not just for losing Michael, but for losing you, too. I won't bother you again. I will raise this baby on my own. Goodbye. Your daughter. Isabel. The letter fell from Sarah's numb fingers. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a fight. It was a deliberate, calculated act of sabotage. Marcus had intercepted the calls. He had lied to Isabel, telling her she was disowned. He had lied to his parents, letting them believe their daughter had simply vanished without a trace. He had single-handedly destroyed his own family to secure his position as the sole heir. At that moment, Eleanor burst into the room, her face etched with panic. Sarah, please don't go. We can sort this out. I was wrong to doubt you. Please. Her words died in her throat as she saw the letters scattered on the floor and the look of cold, devastating realization on Sarah's face. Sarah simply picked up the last letter and handed it to her grandmother. Eleanor's hands shook as she read her dead daughter's final words. She read about the calls, about the pregnancy, about Michael's death. But it was the part about Marcus that made her world collapse. The lie. The cruel, unforgivable lie. The son she had raised, the man she had made CEO of her company, had not only allowed his sister to suffer and die alone, he had orchestrated it. He had let his parents grieve for 30 years over a loss he himself had engineered. A low, guttural sound of pure agony escaped Eleanor's lips. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking for the second and final time. She looked up from the letter, her eyes no longer filled with tears, but with a fire of incandescent rage. She turned and marched out of the room, the letter clutched in her hand like a weapon. Sarah followed, knowing this was no longer about her. This was about a 30-year-old crime that was about to be brought into the light. The truth had finally surfaced, and Marcus Lawson was about to face the consequences of his betrayal. They found Marcus and Victoria in the main hall, smugly waiting for the problem to leave. Eleanor strode right up to her son and, without a word, slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the cavernous space. "You," she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. She held up the letter. "You did this. You let her die alone. You let us think she was gone. You killed your own sister." Marcus's face went white as he saw the letter. The mask of control shattered, replaced by pure, cornered panic. "Mother, it wasn't like that. I was trying to protect you from her, from them." "Protect me?" Eleanor's voice rose to a terrifying roar. "You destroyed us. For money, for power. You are not my son. You are a monster." The truth was out, ugly, brutal, and undeniable. The foundation of the Lawson family had cracked open, revealing the rot and betrayal that lay at its core. The aftermath of the revelation was swift and brutal. In the cold light of his treachery, Marcus Lawson withered. His denials were weak, his excuses pathetic. Victoria, seeing her entire world of wealth and status evaporating before her eyes, tried to distance herself, claiming she knew nothing of Marcus's decades-old secret. But Eleanor was finished with them both. "Get out," Eleanor commanded, her voice devoid of all emotion save for a chilling finality. "Get out of my house. Mr. Abernathy will contact you tomorrow regarding your severance from the company and your disinheritance. You will receive nothing. You are no longer a part of this family." Marcus and Victoria stood there, stripped of their power, their future annihilated by a bundle of old letters. They left the mansion that day with nothing but their expensive clothes and the public disgrace that was sure to follow. The Lawson empire had a new direction, and they were not a part of it. In the quiet that followed their departure, Eleanor turned to Sarah. The old woman looked fragile, aged by the terrible truth, yet there was a new clarity in her eyes. She walked over to Sarah and took both of her hands. "I am so sorry," Eleanor said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I failed your mother, and I failed you by doubting you. Can you ever forgive me?" Sarah looked at the broken woman before her, the woman who was her grandmother, and saw not a billionaire or a matriarch, but just a mother who had lost her child. All the anger and hurt she had felt melted away, replaced by a deep, shared sorrow. "There is nothing to forgive," Sarah whispered, squeezing her hands. "You didn't know. We were both lied to." That moment marked the true beginning of their family. The weeks that followed were not about lawyers and trust funds, though Mr. Abernathy handled all of that quietly in the background, officially installing Sarah as the primary heir to the Lawson fortune. Instead, they were about healing. Eleanor, Sarah, and Tyler became a small, tight-knit unit. They spent their days not in boardrooms, but in the gardens. Eleanor taught Tyler how to play chess the same way she had taught Isabel. Sarah, discovering her mother's old art supplies, started sketching again, a talent she never knew she had. She drew pictures of Tyler chasing butterflies, of Charles the butler secretly smiling, of Eleanor asleep in her armchair, a look of peace finally on her face. One evening, Eleanor found Sarah sitting by the fireplace, the Polaris locket in her hands. "Your mother was supposed to give that back to me on her wedding day," Eleanor said softly. "It was a tradition I wanted to start. The matriarch passes it to her daughter, who passes it to hers. It's a symbol of our guiding star, the love that leads us home." She gently took the locket from Sarah's hand. "It was mine. Then it was Isabel's. Now, Sarah, it is yours." She carefully fastened the silver chain around Sarah's neck. "Wear it not as a memory of what we lost, but as a promise of what we have found." Sarah touched the star, its cool metal a comfort against her skin. It was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It was her history, her future, her connection to a line of strong women she was now proud to be a part of. The mansion, once a cold and intimidating palace, slowly became a home filled with laughter, Tyler's shrieks of joy echoing in the halls, Sarah's quiet chuckles, and Eleanor's warm, contented sighs. The ghosts of the past had not vanished, but they no longer haunted the rooms. Instead, they were cherished memories, integrated into the fabric of a new, stronger family. Eleanor Lawson, the billionaire who had everything, had finally found the one thing she truly needed, the unconditional love of her family. And Sarah Mitchell, the waitress who had nothing, discovered that her greatest inheritance wasn't the money, but the grandmother who had been waiting for her all along, guided home by the light of a silver star. In the end, this wasn't a story about a lost fortune being found, but about a lost family being reunited. It's a powerful reminder that the most valuable treasures we possess are not kept in vaults but in our hearts. The story of Eleanor, Sarah, and Tyler teaches us about the devastating power of secrets, the corrosive nature of greed, and the incredible healing power of forgiveness and second chances. It proves that it's never too late to right a wrong, and that the bonds of family, though they may be stretched and tested, can ultimately endure even the deepest betrayals.